Thanks, Meredith. So as Meredith mentioned, this will be available to you after the presentation. So if you miss anything, you can use the download link. So a little bit about me. My name is Kevin Gabenlian. I've been at Boston Beer Company for almost a year as a social media coordinator for Sam Adams. So a lot of content development, social media strategy, a little bit of advertising. Prior to that, I was at a consulting firm called Cadmus Group for 4 years, where I ran my clients' social media pages. So as part of today's training, I'm going to be talking to you all about social media, websites, tips and tricks, things that you can do to help with your small business, regardless of what product or service that you are trying to promote. So for today's agenda, I know we have a lot of people on the webinar, so we're going to try and leave as much time as possible for Q&A at the end. Before we get to that, we're going to talk a little bit about websites, how much you need them and how they can help your business, an overview of social media strategy, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into some tips and tricks you can use to help with your content, advertising, and things of that nature. And as Meredith had mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the IM space, and I'll try and get to all of them at the end during the Q&A section. So to start, we're going to talk about websites. And the question a lot of people typically ask with small businesses, do I really need a website for my small business? And the short answer to that is yes, you absolutely do. So the big reason why is something called SEO, which stands for search engine optimization. And what that is when someone Googles your product or service, SEO determines how far up that Google ranking your product or page appears. So having a website helps with your SEO ranking so that when someone is searching for your product, it's more discoverable. It's on the first page of Google rather than being more hidden and harder to find. Additionally, it's really important because it is basically the center of where you store all of the information about your product or service. So a lot of people typically ask, isn't my Facebook page enough for an About Me section and things of that nature? And the answer to that is basically Facebook helps. You can put some information on there, but most of your information really should be stored on a website where people can easily maneuver around and find what they're looking for. You can have longer form content, whether that's an About Me section, a blog section, things of that nature, things that really don't work well on social. So it really houses all of that longer form information about your product or service. It's also where you can put your contact us information so that people can more easily reach you. As well as as far as what platform you should use for websites, there's a ton of free or low-cost platforms that you can use to build a website. Some of the ones we've included here that we've used in the past is Squarespace, WordPress, and Tumblr. You don't have to be an expert in web design to use any of these. They come with a lot of pre-made templates where you can just pick a template and start dropping in the content that you have. And as far as cost for a website, it can typically cost anywhere up to like $150 a year or less, depending on what you're moving forward with the website. Obviously, if you want a website that can do a lot of different things, that's going to be a lot more expensive. But for a small business, you can start pretty small and it's not too costly. So what should you put on your website? The most important is the About You section. This is where you're going to talk all about you, your product, your history, why you started your business, what your business is all about, and really think about the story you want to craft, because that's going to be the first thing that draws people in. So you want to make sure you have a robust About section that is not just about you personally, but about the product or service that you're selling. Additionally, you want to make sure you have all the relevant product information, the style, sizes, where people can find your product, how your product is made, any important health information that consumers might want to know. Think through and really put yourself in the consumer's shoes and think about what information they might be searching about your product and make sure you include that. You also want to make sure to include a strong call to action, whether that's to purchase your product, get in touch with you if you offer more of a service, where people can find your product, but really make sure there's a nice distinct call to action at the end so that people are driven to click through. And just as importantly is the social media section. So on your website, you want to make sure that you have links to all of your various social media accounts. A lot of people may not find your website from your social media post. They may just come across it on Google or another source. So it's always important to make sure you have social media links that are easy to find on your page. And lastly, but equally important, is the contact us section. So this is how people can actually get in touch with you. The more ways you have to contact you, the better. So whether that's email, within the website, phone number, whatever you have, you want to make sure you put it on there. And also it's a good idea to put something along the lines of business hours or hours where you know that you'll be able to respond to people when people contact you. So now we're going to talk about social media and how it fits into your overall marketing mix. We just talked about how the role that websites play into the marketing mix, but social media is going to be really the driver of your business and what sells product and creates engagement opportunities with your fans. So the reason social media is so important is because it can provide tactics that traditional marketing can't, in different ways to reach your customer. Big one is specific targeting. So whether it's through paid social media or organic social media, such as location tags, branded hashtags, other tags, you can specifically target the consumers that you want to reach, whether it's a geographic target, so some group that lives close to where you're selling your product, or maybe it's a specific demographic of people that you know would be interested in your product. But that's a super, super important way to use social media that you can't really do with a lot of other marketing tactics. Additionally, it's a great way to get real-time feedback on your products and engagement with your fans. So one of the things we'll talk about a little later is collecting user-generated content and community management. But the real-time feedback you get from people who are commenting on your post is really, really important. You can get a lot of great information by engaging with all the fans that are commenting on your post. You can get information such as what they like about your product, what they don't like about your product, why they don't like your product, and all of those will help you continue to improve your product or service. So super important to make sure you're constantly talking with your fans and getting that real-time feedback. Lastly, social media is a free and easy consumer relations tool. Not only can you send out mass messaging, but it also allows you to have one-on-one conversations with all your consumers, good, bad, or ugly. So you can address negative feedback appropriately, or you can take the positive feedback or reward your top fans. Really do anything with all that free feedback that you're getting. So for the purpose of each channel, it's very important when you're looking across all the platforms you want to be on that you treat each one differently. One of the common questions we get from small business owners is, what channel should I be on? And the answer to that is you should be on whatever channel that matches the content you have. You do not have to be on every channel to have a successful social media presence. You just want to be on the ones that are very important to the product you're selling and to the demographic that you're going after. Facebook, for example, is the overarching social network. It skews the highest in age in terms of demographic. It's where users go to stay up to date with their friends and family, find entertainment, and follow their favorite brands. It has a very specific role of acting as the consumer relations platform. So you'll notice when you're on Facebook, that's where people go to kind of spread word of mouth, to share things, products, services, stories that they like or don't like. So it's a place where you want to make sure you have a presence on, because that's where the general audience is going to be. When we get into Instagram, that's the more content-driven platform. So if you're on Instagram, it's where people are looking for really high-quality photos or funny or inspirational videos. It's where they go to follow their influencers. So the channel role for Instagram is all about generating awareness for your product and engagement with your fans and the people who are purchasing your product. It's the fastest growing platform, so it's where you really want to make sure you have a strong presence and where you want to make sure you have a nice backlog of high quality content that you can post. And then Twitter, this is where people go to stay up to date on the latest trends and news. It's where they go to follow their influencers. It's where really brands should be operating if they're trying to build relevance through leadership. And it's a great consumer relations platform. Every once in a while, you see a story that goes viral on Twitter, and it's a great way to get the general reaction from fans. Now, these are the three that we're going to focus on for today's webinar because they're the three largest platforms and the most important. But I highly encourage you to do research into other platforms like YouTube, Pinterest. All of these have a role in your marketing mix. It's just going to depend on the product or service you offer and the type of content that you want to promote. So once you have a pretty good idea of what platforms you want to be on, the next step is to figure out how often you should be posting and what you should be posting. As far as how often you should be posting, it varies a little bit from each platform. Facebook, you can get away with posting about 1 time per day. I'd say similar with Instagram. A little bit lower cadence is recommended for these two platforms because people will get annoyed very quickly if you're over posting, especially since they're also following friends and family on top of the brands that they follow. They don't want their in-feeds to be too clogged up. So super important that you stick to a limit of 1 a day. For Facebook, we have 4 to 5 times, and Instagram, we have 5 to 6 times. If you're just starting out and you don't have a large backlog of content, don't feel like you need to hit this minimum of 1 post a day. It's really important to make sure that you're only posting content that is high quality, that's going to do a good job of promoting your product or service. So let's say you have maybe 3 good pieces of content in a given week that you want to share. Don't feel like you have to come up with a 4th or 5th post. Just get those 3 out, and over time you can work on building up your content database so that you can make sure you're in the conversation more often with high quality content. Now, when we get to Twitter, that's where you can start to post a lot more often. 5 to 10 times a week is recommended, and that's not including responses. So if you're on Twitter responding to fans or engaging with other brands, that doesn't really count as the number of times you should be posting in feed. One thing to keep in mind is that you can repurpose content across platforms. That's especially useful when you're first starting out and you don't have a lot of content to post. But one thing I would encourage you all to do as your business grows is to try and think of each platform differently. Again, Instagram is a lot more photo and video driven. Twitter is where a lot of your quirky, witty humor goes, your more personalized responses. And then Facebook's where you can post some of your more general content. And getting more specifically into messaging pillars, again, it's super important to make sure you think about ahead of time what you want to post, what the overall messages that you want to send across all the platforms. Some things that you can talk about in your content is your brand. So who you are, what you stand for, stories about your values, the history of your brand, stories about consumers. Another thing you can talk about is occasion. So focus on the moment where people are enjoying your product, how they're enjoying it, where they're enjoying it. If you're out and about taking photos of your product or service being utilized in various settings, those work really great because you're showing your fans how they can enjoy your product or service. And then lastly, and most importantly, is the product. Having a wide variety of content about your product, how it looks, how it should be used, other things that make it front and center. So it can be how your product is being used at an event. It can be user-generated content, which we'll get into a little bit more later, but people enjoying your product. All of those things are really important to make sure you get across and make sure it ladders up to an overarching story. So again, you really want to think through what's the story that you're trying to tell with each post and within each platform. So getting into user-generated content, the big thing I want to get across here is you don't have to create all this content yourself. Don't get bogged down into trying to figure out where to buy a camera and how to shoot high quality content. You can get a lot of content just from what people are posting about your product. So one thing I would recommend doing is spending time every day going through relevant location tags, branded hashtags, and tags of your brand specifically to see what people are posting about your product or service. And if you find any photos that you think are high quality and that you could use on your own platforms, feel free to use it. All you have to do is really reach out to that fan and make sure you get their permission to use their photo. And then when you are posting their photo, make sure you give them a shout out. What that'll do is when people start seeing you giving other fans a shout out, they'll be more inclined to post pictures of your product or service. And that'll just help you generate more UGC. So a lot of UGC will typically come from Instagram because hashtags are so important, and Instagram has some nuanced features like being able to look through branded hashtags. So that's the number one place where I encourage you to spend some time grabbing UGC. If you're just starting out and you're noticing that your brand is still a little bit unknown and you're just not getting UGC, there are a few things you can do organically on the upfront to build that up. One thing you can do is to run a contest that incentivizes people to post photos of your product. So you can either offer free product, discounts, or other prizes. But run a contest to try and spur excitement and get people to post about your product or service. Another thing you can do in the beginning when you're still starting out is lean on your friends and family to post photos of your product. Word of mouth is a great way to build that upfront content catalog. So if you're able to lean on your friends and family to post photos of your product, that's a great way on the upfront to get that UGC before other fans start posting about it. So once you have a good idea of the type of content you want to post, once you start building out your content backlog, that's when you can start to build out an actual content calendar. Now, what a content calendar is it's basically a file that stores all of the information on what you're going to be posting. I personally like to use Excel. You can use Word. There's other free tools out there that you can use to help organize yourself. It doesn't have to be anything super complicated, especially when you're starting out. It can be as simple as an Excel file that has a column for the date you want to post, a column for the copy that you're going to use in the post, a column for the image or video you're going to use, and then maybe another one for the overall theme or story you're trying to tell with that post. Or if there's a link involved, you can have a column for the CTA. But having a content calendar is super important because it helps keep you organized. But more importantly, it helps you identify gaps where you think you may need content. So let's say you put a content calendar together for September and you're going through and you're realizing, you know what, I have a lot of great photos of my product, but I'm noticing that I'm missing photos of my product at events, or maybe I'm missing a lot of UGC. So looking ahead at these content calendars will help you fill in those gaps because you'll be able to realize, okay, I need UGC for September. So over the course of the next few weeks, I'm going to focus on getting that UGC so I can squeeze it into the gaps. Now, a content calendar can be quarterly, monthly, weekly, whatever works best for you. Like I said, there's free templates you can find online. There's complicated ones. There's ones that are very easy to use. It just depends on the product and service that you offer and how often you want to be posting. So once you have your content in place, then the last step before you really start building a presence on social media is figuring out how to actually craft a high quality post. And some of these nuances are different in each platform. So starting with Facebook, how to create a strong Facebook post. Some of the elements of a strong Facebook post, you want to make sure you always have a visual, whether it's a video or photo. That's why it's super important to try to build a backlog of content, whether it's UGC, photos you've taken yourself, videos. wherever you can source those, but you always want to make sure you have a photo or video with a Facebook post. Have a clear call to action. So not every post has to be, hey, buy my product, but you want to have a clear point to your post. So before you post something, always ask yourself, what's the point of this post? What am I trying to establish? What's my goal? And make sure that's made clear in the call to action. When posting a link, make sure you have a short URL so it doesn't look messy in the post. There's free tools such as Bitly that you can use that you basically plug in the long link and it spits out a shorter version of that link for you. Things like that just help, especially on Twitter where you have to deal with a character account. It helps make sure that your links don't look messy or, you know, fit that character count. Some recommended content that you can post on Facebook are special events and promotions, featured menu items or featured products. Maybe you just came out with a new product and you want to promote that. And then consumer photos. As I mentioned earlier, Facebook is where a lot of people go to get caught up on what their friends or family are doing. So this is a great place where you can share consumer photos. And on the right side here, you can see an example from one of our own posts. So here you see this was a video that I pulled a screenshot of for National Beer Day. So one thing I would recommend is if there are any national holidays or Twitter observances, things of that nature that are relevant to your product or service, always make sure that you have content planned to go out on that day because people are going to be looking through those national hashtags. So people are going to be, in this specific example, looking at hashtags of National Beer Day and seeing what people are posting. So it's a really, really great way to build an organic following is making sure you're staying in these relevant conversations. So you can see in this example, we made sure to get a post out on National Beer Day. In this case, we wanted to promote Sam 76. So you can see in the photo, you know, we made sure to have both the can, the beer on draft, and the packaging in the background so that people really get the full breadth of what Sam 76 is. And then with the post copy, we made sure to keep it short and simple. In this case, there is no link because, you know, with the alcohol industry, we can't sell directly to consumers. So that's not something that really applies to us. But in your case, you may want to have a call to action at the end. For Instagram posts, the elements of a creative Instagram post, you want to make sure you're sharing a high quality image. So some things that are very important, and you can kind of see on the example we have on the right side here, but pay a lot of attention when you're taking a photo to what the lighting looks like, what angle you're taking the photo at. Let's say your product is some kind of food. You want to make sure that food looks very appetizing. So really think through, make sure it's not a pixelated image. You're using a high quality smartphone or a camera to take the photo. Pay attention to shading or glares, things of that nature. Also make sure to reduce anything going on in the background. You don't want there to be a lot of background noise because that'll detract from the focus of the image. All of these little things apply and are very important to Instagram photos. So you want to make sure you use the highest quality photos on Instagram. Some simple tips that you can use to extend the reach of your Instagram post. Using a few hashtags in the caption. If there are any relevant hashtags, it could be a branded hashtag, or it can be hashtags that are relevant to your product. So for example, let's say your product is maybe a barbecue sauce. Try and find some hashtags that maybe the average consumer would be looking at to discover new barbecue products. So maybe it's as simple as hashtag barbecue, or something a little more nuanced, but spend some time, do some research into popular hashtags and find the ones that are most relevant to your brand and make sure that you're including them in your post so that people who are searching those hashtags come across your post. Another thing that you could use to extend the reach of your Instagram post is tagging your location. This may not apply to all products and services, but if you sell some sort of product or service that is very popular in a certain location, make sure you tag your location so that people who are searching for that location also come across your product. And then lastly, if you're doing a cross promotion where there's other brands in your product, make sure you tag them as well so they can engage or their followers come across your post as well. For recommended content, again, photography works best. If you're posting videos, that's great. Videos work well if they're short, sweet, a lot of humor in the video, but mostly you want to post high quality photography. Behind the scenes style content work really well. So whether it's the making of food or drinks, or maybe it's just behind the scenes of you or your employees having a fun time with your product. It can be event coverage. So if your product is at an event, maybe sharing some Instagram stories of people enjoying the event, enjoying your product at the event. And then again, UGC. UGC is probably biggest on Instagram, because you can either post in feed or on Instagram stories. So again, when you are trying to source UGC, really think through how that's going to come through on Instagram, because that's going to be most likely where you use it. And then lastly, how to craft an effective tweet. Whenever possible, include a piece of creative, whether that's a video or photo. Now, this won't be as important as it is on Facebook or Instagram. Text-only tweets are a lot more commonplace, especially since this platform is primarily used for news and events and kind of live in the moment information. So it's totally fine if you don't have a photo or video, but that should still remain a part of your mix. All tweets should include some form of blue, and what we mean by that is either a hashtag, a link, or a tag. So again, you want to have a clear call to action at the end of the post. Make sure you're driving home whatever your goal is for that tweet. Now on Twitter, not every tweet needs to have a purpose. So it can be as simple as just inserting yourself into a conversation. So if you are a craft brewer, for example, you may want to pay attention to what other competitors are saying about craft beer in general and be prepared to insert yourself in those conversations to, reach new audiences. For recommended content, some things that work well on Twitter are event information. So let's say you're at an event and maybe you're doing a giveaway, making sure you're keeping fans up to date on how many of your product is left. Things of that nature perform really well on Twitter. Also, what's new, anything that's newsworthy. So whether it's a new product, new menu item, whatever it may be, maybe you're opening up a new location, all of those things work very well on Twitter. Twitter is also where people go for humor. So a lot of fun facts, banter amongst either your fans or with relevant brands, maybe it's competitors. But that kind of stuff works really, really well on Twitter. And also industry related news. Don't feel like every piece of news you have to share has to be about your brand or product specifically. It could just be general industry news, and people will appreciate that because you're not trying to sell them with every single tweet. So we've talked a little bit about organic social media content. Now we're going to get into social media advertising. Now, a question we get often is, how much money do I need for social media advertising, and is it really worth it? And to answer that, you don't need a big budget to run social media advertising. Any budget is worth the cost. It's a very easy way to reach new audiences. And one of the things we were talking about earlier in the webinar was how easy social media makes it to target new audiences. Well, advertising is how you really do that. So you can put as little as a few dollars behind a post, knowing that it's not going to have a very huge reach, but what those few dollars are going to allow you to do is get very granular in your targeting. So you'll be able to target people in a specific location who have specific interests, and that way you're reaching audiences who are most likely to enjoy your product or service. Some things you can advertise on are events, especially local events, because you can target people that live within a certain square mile of that event. So it's a great way to promote events. Any evergreen, high quality content is great to promote through advertising. One thing I would recommend doing is really, especially in the beginning when you're just starting out, be very creative and a little bit risky with your content. And anytime you come across a piece of content that is significantly outperforming the others, put a few dollars behind it so that it gets some additional pickup, because the way social media platforms are designed is if a post gets enough organic traction on its own, these platforms' algorithms are designed to show that piece of content to a lot more people when you put ad dollars behind it. So anytime you notice a piece of content outperforming others, don't be afraid to put a few dollars behind it, because that'll create a domino effect and you'll be able to reach new audiences that way. So generally speaking, anywhere from $50 to $200 behind a post is plenty to get it going and have it reach new audiences. But don't be afraid to spend more than that. Don't be afraid to spend less. Again, whatever your budget is, you can make it work. The big thing is you want to make sure to have advertising every so often. So you don't want to run it once and then not do it for a few weeks or a few months, but really make sure you're putting a few dollars behind advertising on a weekly or monthly basis so that you're constantly reaching new audiences and always staying in the conversation. And as far as best practices for promoted posts go, it's really important that you keep both the title and the body copy short and sweet. That way it doesn't get cut off, especially on mobile. So it's always important to keep it short, sweet, with a very clear call to action. And again, when we were talking about the importance of having a website, this is where having a website is really important, because when you're running advertisements, you want a clear place to point people to. So having a website is really important for that. I would recommend taking some time before you run any advertisements to look up each platform's requirements. They all have some nuanced differences in terms of character count, sizing. So for example, on Instagram, you want to make sure if you're running an advertisement, it's squared, whereas on Facebook or Twitter, you can have a more horizontal oriented piece of content. So always make sure you're looking up what each platform's requirements are before you run an ad on that platform. Also, if you are not sure where you want to start advertising, I would start on Instagram and then go from there. Right now, Instagram is the fastest growing platform. It's where people are most engaging with brands. So it's where I'd recommend starting out. In my experience, I've found that we get the best return on investment when putting dollars behind Instagram content versus any other platform. So that's a good safe place to start. And then from there, as your brand goes and your budget gets bigger, you can start to expand into other platforms. And then when writing ad copy, some considerations you could make is make sure you have an attention-grabbing headline that matches what's in the image. So let's say you have a nice summary-looking image. You want to make sure the caption matches that. Hook them with some fear of missing out style headlines. So whether that's product being available for only a certain number of time, or if you're promoting an event, you know, saying there's only a few tickets left, but really drive home that fear of missing out. You want people to, you know, look at your ad and share it with their friends or family to drive that word of mouth. And creating a sense of urgency with deadlines is very important to that. So to recap some of the things we talked about so far during this webinar, a website is going to be a very critical part of your brand identity. It provides legitimacy, authenticity. It's where you can store all the long form content and information about you and about your brand. So it's also where your social media posts, especially advertising, are going to drive through. So super important to have a website. And websites are not expensive. You can get by with a few dollars a month behind just the website and domain name. Next, social media should absolutely be a part of your marketing mix. Provide some things that traditional marketing can't, which is one-on-one engagement with your fans, specific targeting, and a constant feedback loop. So you're always getting information on what your fans are saying about your product or service. When developing your content calendar, make sure you give it some thought in advance and outline what your strategies are going to be for that content calendar. So what's the story you're trying to tell? What are your goals with the posts? what platforms do you want to be on. Don't feel like you have to start off on every platform right off the bat. Start on one platform, make sure you're doing really well on that platform, then you can start expanding into other ones. And as always, make sure you're staying in every conversation that's relevant to your product or service as much as you can. Social content should be a healthy mix of brand, product, and occasion. And you should always sprinkle some user-generated content throughout that. It's a great way to reduce some of the burden on you so you don't feel like you have to shoot all this content. And it's a great way to promote the people who are promoting your product. And lastly, paid social media advertising is a great way to reach specific audiences. And the best use cases for that are event promotion and evergreen content. If you see a piece of content that's outperforming others, then don't be afraid to put some dollars behind that to give it some extra legs. So for the rest of today's time, I'm going to be answering any questions you have, whether it's about anything we spoke about during this webinar, anything else, anything that's specific to your product or service. Feel free to start asking any questions you may have.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kevin. I think this is really valuable information for everyone and really appreciate you taking the time to walk through some of these steps. So we've already got a couple questions, but folks, feel free to type into the chat box any questions that you may have. So the first one that we have is around attention span, right? The whole reason social media exists is because people don't have an attention span to watch a really long video or read 7 paragraphs of an article, that kind of thing. And you mentioned that Instagram videos should be pretty short. Is that because people on Instagram are sort of primed to have a shorter attention span than, say, on a Facebook post that could be a little bit longer of a video?
That's a very great question and something a lot of brands struggle with when it comes to video. Overall, I'd recommend your videos be short, sweet, and try and interject as much humor as you possibly can. The reason for that is people typically have short attention spans on social media. And the reason for that is they're not just following your brand, but they're trying to stay up to date with what their friends and family are doing. And they're following a bunch of different brands. So they're only going to pay attention to each post that they scroll through for a few seconds unless there's something that really grabs their attention. Usually they're just scrolling up their newsfeed to try and get caught up. So they're going to spend about a second or two on each post unless there's something in there that really draws their attention. So don't try and shoot videos just for the sake of shooting videos, but really focus on coming up with something creative and funny that you know is going to draw the fans' attention. And always ask yourself, like, when you're shooting a piece of content, whether it's a photo or video, ask yourself, is this something I would share with my friends if I came across it on social media?
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. If this was in my news feed, would I care? Would I stop and look at it? Yeah. Great. So we've got a few more questions. One question around the small business advertising on social media. If somebody is looking at advertising on social media, on Facebook specifically, should the goal be to get more followers or more page likes? Is that sort of an appropriate call to action for those types of advertising dollars? Or does it make more sense to be targeting for, like you were saying, a specific occasion or a specific product launch? Is there any utility to getting people just to follow you?
That's a great question. And the great thing, and one of the things I love about Facebook's advertising platform, is that before you even get into the specifics of the ad that you want to run, Facebook asks you what the goal for that advertisement is, and it gives you a whole list. So you can set that goal of the ad to be follower growth, just reach or impressions or sales. And then depending on the goal you pick, that's going to determine how Facebook's algorithm shows that ad to people. So if you decide that your goal for a piece of content is follower growth, Facebook's going to show that ad to people who are most likely to be into your brand. So before you run an advertisement, it's really important to think through what your goal is. And that goal is going to vary depending on how new your business is, how many followers you already have. One thing I would recommend is if you're going to run follower ads, keep in mind that as a secondary benefit, the other ads you run are going to already increase your following if people like the content you promote. So I would start with running advertising that is promoting your product or service first, because as a secondary benefit, that's going to already grow your following if people like the content you're sharing. And then after that, if you feel like you could be doing a little bit more to grow your following, you could grow follower advertisements as well. Another thing that you could do is run multiple ads at once that each have a different goal. So what you can do is run one advertisement that is promoting a specific event. You set the goal to that event. So Facebook's only going to show people the ad if they're most likely to actually attend the event. And then at the same time, maybe you run another ad that has the goal of follower growth. So Facebook's going to show that ad to an entirely different set of people. So that way you're kind of hitting different goals at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And you can kind of test them too and see which one performs better. And that might tell you something about how people interact with your content or what's the most relevant way to reach folks on that particular platform. That's a good idea. Cool. All right. So we've got a couple more questions here. One question, this comes up a lot, and this is sort of like social media adjacent, is the issue of Yelp. So I think Yelp can kind of be like a blessing or a curse for small businesses. So we had a question around any tips or best practices, about reacting to negative reviews. If someone has a critique or criticism, is it best to interact with that user and respond to that review, or just to let it lie? What do you think about that, Kevin?
Overall, you should try and address as many of the complaints that come in about your brand. Now, a small percentage of those complaints are going to be from people who you just can't win with. There's going to be a very small percentage of those that you should just ignore. But for the most part, if it's a genuine complaint that is addressable, you should always address it. It's a great way to, A, learn about something that people may not like about your product or service and try and fix it. And B, it's a great opportunity to provide positive awareness for the customer service you provide. So let's say someone comes on Yelp and has a negative review. If you respond to that review and try your best to turn it into a positive one, other people who are on Yelp are going to see that negative review, but then they're going to see that the problem was solved and how much you went out of your way to try and solve the issue. And now they're going to be more inclined to actually engage with you, and they'll be a little less concerned about that negative review. So it's very, very important that you spend a lot of time addressing negative reviews and trying to learn from it and turn it into a positive review. And some things you can do to do that: let's say someone has a negative review on your product and service. Depending on what that review is, you can do some things such as sending free product their way. Maybe you feature them in a piece of content, but anything you can do to just turn their experience positive so that they start talking positively about your brand, because that's going to spread a positive word of mouth.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Sometimes it feels almost scary to interact. If somebody says something negative, you almost like just want to shy away from it because it feels personal and almost like kind of frightening. But we had one of the businesses supported by BTAD is a restaurant that had a really good experience turning a negative into a positive. So it was a restaurant that somebody left a sort of like subpar, I think it was like a 3-star type of review. So it wasn't even something super negative or scary, but the restaurant owner replied and apologized that the experience wasn't up to the reviewer's standards, and invited them to come back to the restaurant, kind of like give us a second chance type of rhetoric. And the reviewer did, and came back in, and the restaurant owner was there to greet the person and make sure that their experience was better. And they actually did a follow-up review, sort of correcting and giving the restaurant owner a lot of credit for that really good customer service. So that's sort of an above and beyond example, but I think you're exactly right, Kevin. You can turn the negative into a positive, and then it's there on the internet for everyone to see, which can be really good.
Yeah, and one more thing I'd add to that is you don't feel like you have to address every negative comment right away. You should address it as quickly as you can, but do some research first. You can Google case studies of ways other brands have responded to negative feedback, or how other brands that maybe are in your same industry have dealt with the issue, but don't feel like you need to respond right away if you don't know how to respond. Take the time to see how others have responded in similar situations so that you can make sure that you craft an authentic response.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, especially on a platform like Twitter where it's super easy to just fire something off and not think about it. So just to take a breath and wait a minute, I think is really good advice. Alrighty, so a couple more questions. Moving back to the website conversation, I know we're more focused on social media for this particular conversation, but a lot of our social media content should link back to our websites. When it comes to getting a web domain and then maintaining and updating, a couple questions about just on a very practical level. Do you have to renew a domain, or once you buy it, you have it forever, or you need to make sure that you keep it current?
So depends on which service you use, but most places will automatically renew your domain on a yearly basis. You just want to check and make sure based on which platform you're using. Okay. Most will automatically renew though.
Good. Okay. And then with updating that content, if a business is really keeping itself busy with posting on Facebook 5 or 6 times a week, Instagram 5 or 6 times a week, that kind of thing, how often should somebody look to update the content on the website itself? Probably less often, right?
Definitely less often. Think of social media as like a daily content driver, business driver, and website is more, I would say, quarterly or even yearly, just depends. If your product looks the same a year later, then you don't necessarily have to change everything out. It really just depends on how often you're making any changes to your product or service. But anytime you have a new product, or maybe you change the packaging in a product, things like that should always be updated on the website so that people aren't confused when they go to your website.
Right, that makes sense. Okay, so that one's not quite as, it's not as intensive. You can let the content sit for a little bit and be more active on the social media side.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I think that's all the questions that we have gotten for today. But I really want to thank you, Kevin, for taking the time to explain some of these pieces. It's such an important part, an increasingly important part of being able to market a small business. And so we're really pleased to be able to share this expertise with everybody. So I really appreciate you taking the time today. And I want to thank everybody who joined us as well for spending some time really investing this hour in bettering your business strategy and your marketing efforts for your small business. So many thanks to everybody who joined us, and I will be sending an email shortly that contains a recording of this conversation and also just a quick survey for you to fill out to let us know how we did. So thanks again, and everybody have a good day.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Bye-bye.